Old.
Can we close this?
Yeah,
Please.
you probably should, just in case staff comes down here and thinks we're having too much fun.
Mary Lou will come bursting in here.
I'm ready.
Why don't we talk, for starters, about just the whole idea of interactivity? We talked in Chicago last year when you were doing the media tour. Now you've been TRI for, I guess, almost a year, 8 months, something like that.
Yeah, I would say.
How do you think people feel about interactivity? You think, what are your thoughts on the whole concept, having had the disc out and toured with it?
Well, in the greater scope of things, the term interactivity has just become too popular in some ways. Anyone who has sort of an old concept that they want to freshen up, then they just like add interactivity to it, and it suddenly seems like it's up to date. But I think that this is the source of a lot of confusion on the part of the public at large, because there aren't a lot of clear examples you can point to that the average person could say, yeah, I recognize that as being an interactive experience. And it may just be that that it's not even necessary to characterize it so much as just realize where it is and where it isn't, rather than always trying to get an idea of what the character of it is, what the responsibilities of it are. In the same way that the telephone has become ubiquitous to the point that people don't think they're programming a computer when they use the telephone, but that's what they're doing. And so interactivity, or using the term interactivity, or being self-conscious about interactivity, is probably just a phase that eventually we'll get through, and we will just go back to recognizing contemporary art as having its own particular qualities, one of which may be interactivity. But from my standpoint, it has changed the way I work and the way that I present myself. The unfortunate part is that everyone now is interactive. Everything's interactive. It's an interactive world. It gets harder and harder to characterize that, as opposed to a lot of the things that I may consider less interactive, but that people want to call interactive. You know.
I.e. Billy Idol. I mean,
yeah, excellent example. You know, it's very easy for an artist to go back and recycle their old content and put it on a CD-ROM and then suddenly claim to be interactive. And I have certain kind of guidelines that I use for myself that justify the term interactive in my mind. And they aren't all necessarily technological, but they do involve changing the rules somewhat. In live performance, it means that a lot of the traditional dividing lines between the performer and the audience have become more blurry, and that the audience has a lot to do with the character of the show, rather than me trying to make the show be this inviolate thing that's the same every night. It's actually meant to be different every night, and one of the factors that determines how different it is the degree to which the audience participates in the whole presentation.
and the show has changed a lot. I've noticed, I think I've seen 4 of them now. And early in the tour, of course, you had the technical problems, and you were trying to sort out the bugs.
Yeah.
But now you're to the point, it seems, where you're a lot more comfortable with everything working, and things are changing even more than before, and you seem to be having more fun with it.
Yeah, I tend to go through phases where I want to do things very differently, in particular, not from a night-to-night basis, and then I go through phases where I get maybe a little lazy and tend to do things that I know will work. So the challenge for me is to try and continually take advantage of the fact that the audience is willing to let me experiment a little bit, and not fall into sort of habits, which I think is probably an essential element of my interactive concept. It's this kind of breaking out of traditional structures and questioning in some ways what seems to be the norm. See whether there are other ways to do things that are just as satisfying for everyone involved, and at the same time don't necessarily follow a formula.
I want to make sure I heard you right earlier. You were saying that you think that interactivity could be one part of the musical spectrum in terms of art. Is there ever a day you think when everything might be interactive? Is this the wave of the future, or is this just one avenue that you can travel down?
Well, the significant thing about interactive art, or anything, I suppose, that you want to claim to be interactive, is this what I call a destruction of the narrative. People are used to things like music and films and other kinds of sort of formal presentations as having a distinct beginning and end to them, and a distinct sequence of events. And one of the essential things about interactivity is that it takes these traditionally linear art forms and it destroys the narrative. In other words, it implies that there is no beginning or end, and there is no preset sequence of events. That essentially it's like a water faucet. You just turn it on and goes until you turn it off. You know, and the nature of what happens within that particular context is a product of a lot of factors besides us trying to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've come to realize over time is that the narrative is actually the false construct. In real life, there is no such thing as a formal narrative. A story, as it were, is simply an arbitrary starting point somewhere in time and an arbitrary ending point. Case in point is they lived happily ever after. Well, that's a nice way to end the story, but in reality, they didn't live happily ever after. They got up the next day and they got into a fight, you know, and they went on with their normal daily lives, or, you know, the things that usually happen. And in that sense, I think interactive art can be a more accurate reflection of human enterprise than a narrative, which is sort of a false construct. It's a good way to sort of point out some particular thing that you want to emphasize, but it doesn't reflect the natural dynamic of human interactions.
Do you think that, and do you need a glass of water?
Yes, I do.
Jeff, would you mind running and I'd take one too.
Okay.
And we'll pay you back if you have to pay for it.
Tuesday.
Yeah, it's like wimpy. I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a glass of water today. One thing I hear a lot of, you know, the information superhighway, all these stupid words that get bandied about, and I don't know if people are ready for this. I mean, that's the big concern I have, is they're building all this stuff, and they're all prepared for the future, but most people, there was a survey this week, 16% of Americans have the 12 o'clock flashing on their VCR because they can't program the clock. Right.
The obligations, I think, to make this successful, to make the information superhighway, the new model of human communications, which is many to many rather than one to many, the way things are now. I don't think it's so much the responsibility of the audience as it is the responsibility of artists and the people who do the support technologies for that, people who design human machine interfaces, you know, or ways of communicating with databases that are automated. In other words, it's not like talking to a human being at the other end when you want a number, you know, and the way that people are used to. You know, usually the difference, I suppose, is when you used to call up a big corporation, you would get an operator and you say, I want to talk to so-and-so, and they would look up the number on a big list and connect you to that person. Now it's automated voice answer says, if you would like to speak with so-and-so, press this number, and if you want this, they give you a list of options. So it's essentially what they call
voicemail.
Voicemail, yeah. There's email, voicemail, all kinds of
buzzwords.
Buzzwords based on familiar paradigms. And in that sense, it's the it's the responsibility of people who design these interfaces to come up with something that's more appealing and satisfying to the audience. And it's also the responsibility of artists to come up with content that fulfills people's expectations. And the biggest problem, I think, is going to be the lack of content providers. Artists who are satisfied to do things the old way because it gets them a return, gets them the attention they want, makes a living for them. You know, not a lot of artists feel it necessary to go out on a limb to try and establish a new technology, a new way of communicating your ideas, when the old way still seems to succeed for them. So I don't think that the stumbling blocks or the barriers to the acceptance of this new kind of the super information highway or new ways of interacting with other people in this other model, which is rather than someone always broadcasting to you, you can communicate directly with someone through your television. Mm-hmm. It's not really the audience's responsibility to fulfill that. It's up to the content providers.
But you're going to have all this bandwidth, and you're right, a lot of people who don't know what to do with it. A lot of people who have never thought, okay, I can do these things, mm-hmm. How am I going to do them?
I know of people who have been wrestling with these problems for a long time in various, not necessarily comprehensive way, but Ted Nelson, who has this thing called the Xanadu Project, and his whole paradigm is publishing, and what he wants to do is remove that, you know, the typical kind of restrictions from publishing and allow anyone to contribute to a sort of huge base of mostly text type ideas that can be quoted and appended and footnoted almost without limitation, and eventually attributed and paid for in various ways. And he's been doing this for years before anyone thought of, you know, so-called interactive television or information superhighways, all based on the theory of what might happen, not necessarily on a reality that already existed. And there aren't enough people like that. His ideas may or may not actually take root, but in some ways it's, you know, we're not the theorists and the ultimate content providers and the people who are touting the so-called information superhighway are not necessarily in sync right now. I think that most people who are business-oriented in this particular field still think in terms of old content and recycling old content. That's why this Paramount-Viacom deal is such a huge thing. Everyone knows Viacom is eventually going to be one of the biggest interactive players because they've got so many cable hookups already. The reason why they want Paramount so bad is just so they can get all those old movies. You know, it's not. It won't generate any new content. You know, at least if it does, it'll be at a significantly slower pace than the old content can be repackaged and turned around. So there still isn't a lot of forward thinking on the part of content providers, and most of the concepts that I've seen are ways of repackaging old content.
What do you see as a timetable for a day when we might actually sit down and have all this crap? I mean, I know some systems are being built right now. Orlando, Florida is supposed to go online this spring.
I think that most people will have had the experience of this new paradigm by the end of the millennium. That's the year 2000, by the way. It being already 1994, almost 1995, I think a lot of people expected it to happen more quickly. That before the year 2000, we had a significant number of interactive hookups. I think that that there's going to be a lot of losers as well in the beginning. There may be a lot of dissatisfaction on the part of the end user, particularly if they have to spend a lot of money to be an early adopter, and then suddenly discover that there's this kind of like very wide, empty highway out there, with nothing really on it, or it's the equivalent of a highway with, nothing but ugly billboards and crap all down the side of it, and fast food restaurants and the equivalent, I suppose, whatever QVC's image of information superhighway would have been, which is like cheesy mini malls on all the corners, just selling crappy, goods to people with no taste. So, unfortunately, there is going to be a lot of that in the beginning, because we're going to have suddenly we'll have a lot of bandwidth and not a lot of stuff to put in that bandwidth. Examples abound. It's not something that can't be evolved out of, but it does require a sort of synchronicity of user response and provider enterprise. It's like the science fiction channel, which is substantially a failure because it's all old content, almost entirely old content that people have seen, and only the most hardcore people want to see it again. And suddenly when you say, okay, science fiction, there must be a lot of science fiction out there, let's just get it all and put it on one channel, then you suddenly discover how thin a particular area of content might be, when you start to watch, Battlestar Galactica episodes back to back, and things like that. The converse of that would be something like MTV, where they started out just simply using pre-existing content that had been sort of piling up for years. And before the concept completely petered out on them, they started generating original programming built around the audience that they had sort of gotten a hook in with this old concept. And MTV's dominance is not so much because of its monopoly on music any longer, but because of its willingness to diversify and do it in an original way, develop content that's particular to the audience that they're trying to reach. And that, I think, is going to be the pattern. There's going to be a lot of people out there trying to fill slots in the information superhighway with old content that will make a lot of people think that there's nothing new about this, that it's simply another way to retread new lamps for old and all this other kind of stuff. The people I think that will ultimately be successful are the ones that make a big investment in developing new content that is particular to this kind of delivery system.
Well, that brings me around to this question. This could be great news for the music business, which has become so fat and it's promotion driven. If you have a delivery system that you make an album yesterday and decide you want to download it today, people can sample it, listen to it, buy it, you eliminate all that mucky promotion business that really determines what gets played and what gets heard.
That's something I'm looking forward to. I've always had a problem with the middlemen between me and the audience. It's never been so much a problem once someone has had the opportunity to be exposed to my music. They either like it or they don't, but usually the response is much more favorable than you would expect from the kind of exposure that I get through the normal channels. In order to reach the audience, first of all, you have to go through the manufacturing aspects, which include turning it into this kind of particular form factor, for one thing. I mean, when you record, you don't record onto CDs, you record onto tape, or more recently right onto, like big magnetic hard drives or something like that. And eventually it has to go through several steps before it winds up on the final form that people buy, which is a CD. There's all of the aspects of that. Then there's the aspects of, getting it onto the trucks and to the stores and through the distribution outlets. And then you have to convince people who own the record store to give you some space in the store so that people can find the record, and you have to get people at the radio stations to play the record, and you have to get MTV to put the video on. All these people that you have to sort of talk into going along with you before it ever gets exposed to the people that are meant to hear it. And particularly in a market as bloated as music is, a lot of people just get muscled out unless they're willing to do things that don't necessarily have anything to do with the musical experience. So I'm looking forward to the time when all of these middlemen will sort of be removed, and the whole paradigm by which people locate music that they want to listen to will be different as well. I think it's that the audience's tastes are, or the audience's dynamic is already starting to change, in that glamour artists are becoming a niche in a way. Madonnas and Michael Jacksons and people like that are becoming one kind of artist, mostly devoted to glorification of their personality in one way or another, or marketing of their personality in one way or another, not only through music but through the videos and through other things that that they may produce. And then there are artists who are stylists, who satisfy stylistic needs that the audience has, and their names are less important. In alternative music, it's just the flavor of the month at this point. You just want something new all the time. And so in that sense,
To become anything close to mainstream,
you've had it.
Alternative.
You're out of it.
You still find our REM records in alternative bins, which is a joke. But kids today seem to like things that are very unhip.
Things that nobody else knows about, that are just very sort of private to them, in a way. And as soon as the mainstream finds out about it, it's, where's the fun in that?
Well, if you do download music, well, how would it be recorded at home? Would you have a disc system, or would it come out of a printer? How would the music be distributed so you could keep it and replay it?
So you mean if I was downloading it to my house? Mm-hmm. Well, in all likelihood, you could. There are a number of recordable formats besides the one that everyone is most familiar with, which is cassette tape. If nothing else, you can do what people are able to do nowadays if they're hooked up to some one of these new sort of cable music channels, which are an extension of cable television. A lot of local services will offer you a sort of expanded cable box. It's got a bigger readout on it that give you extra information. And there'll be 75 or 100 channels of very specific sort of music with no disc jockeys. It's just songs played one after the other, all to a specific genre. Like you say, I'm interested in modern jazz. So it's nothing but modern jazz songs back to back. Or I'm interested in alternative, nothing but alternative back to back. No hits, just alternative music, Or I'm interested in hits radio, or I'm interested in country music, I'm interested in old-fashioned country, I'm interested in modern country. It's they can break it down any number of ways, to fill in the 75 or 100 different slots available. And then you can just hook up your, let's say, your cassette recorder to that, and record. Not necessarily any specific artist that you want, because it is not interactive in that way. You can pick any of the 75 channels, but you can't say what you want to hear at any particular time. You just have to kind of accept it. But you could do the same thing for an on-demand system, where you say, I want to hear a particular song or a particular artist. You just hook up your cassette recorder. But the devices that the range of devices you'll be able to hook up to record will expand. There'll be writable CDs. There'll be there's mini data discs or mini discs, which I don't know whether the format will survive, but it fits the bill because you can record on it. And probably in the not too distant future, when you buy a television, you're actually buying a computer with a big TV screen. And it may have storage built into it. And the key ultimately to the to the success of this thing is new compression schemes, ways to make the signal that comes down very small while retaining as much of the fidelity as possible, so that when you store it, you're compacting a lot more stuff on there. Like, rather than having the typical hour's worth of music on a CD, you might be able to get 5 or 10 hours worth of music on a CD. That way you don't have to, buy so much storage medium, and also you will get used to the idea of keeping things temporarily and throwing them away. When you buy a CD now, since it isn't re-recordable, essentially when you grow tired of it, it becomes more of a physical possession than an actual experience any longer. You don't listen to it anymore, but it's still taking up space in your house somewhere. And there are probably a lot of CDs in anyone's collection where they say, well, I was never that crazy about that when I heard a song I liked on the radio, but I wasn't that crazy about the rest of it. It'd be nice if I could throw the rest of the album out, and put something else in there instead. And it'll not only change the way that people listen to and save music, but also the way that it's marketed will be completely different, because it's going to be more like, I think, music by the yard, rather than
here it is, take it.
Yeah, rather than take it or leave it as it is, as if it was a finished garment.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually buy it by the yard, take as much as you want, or the equivalent to going into a Sizzler restaurant, at the all-you-can-eat salad bar, something like that. It's you get to pick and choose a little bit more particularly what you want, and pay for it by the pound. You take it to the checkout counter and they put the whole styro thing up there on the scales, and it doesn't matter exactly what you bought. They'll work out the problem of making sure that everyone gets compensated. You don't have to think about that.
Your future, I know you're going to produce Boy George next month?
It won't be until April. And yeah, we're expecting that to happen.
Great.
It's never guaranteed until we actually start recording, but we think it'll be happening.
I personally think it'll be a cool project.
I hope so. It's there's always a lot of there's some expectations when big names are involved, or when someone is trying to reestablish their connection with the audience. He hasn't had except for The Crying Game, has not had really hit records for 8 years or so.
It's kind of an accident anyway, and then you have a hit like that, you think, ooh, maybe I've got it back.
Well, he's been putting out records, they just haven't been played, they haven't been successful, they haven't fit the whatever.
Well, how about you in terms of your projects? Do you have any more interactive projects planned?
Yeah, well, we're doing what we call ports right now, the other versions of the interactive music disc. What originally came out as a CDI will be coming out in Macintosh and versions for other platforms. And also we're going to be moving into a sort of more comprehensive exploitation of the things that we've learned in doing this interactive music thing, trying to apply it to other artists and other kinds of music, and also to other types of media, to so-called interactive movies or interactive experiences that may not have any narrative line to them. Sort of like adventure games, but more something that something that's not so goal-driven. In other words, you're not the object is not to save the princess or kill the demon or anything like that. It's more to be in a certain place or to experience a certain environment that that is always sort of different, changing, just like real life. The situation is always different. And at the same time, the goals are not clearly outlined.
Would that fall under Newtopia? Or is it something?
Well, Newtopia does specifically the images that that may or may not be for, for those particular things. We do things that are not interactive. But Newtopia does computer images that require a lot of rendering time and a lot of extensive design and things like that. So it's part of the process. Newtopia is an element in the process, but there are a lot of different specialties that go into making a so-called interactive title. So it's just like movies, you have to have a lot of people skilled at a lot of different things, and everyone has different responsibilities in it.
Will your back catalog be subject to any of this? In terms of
Probably will be. I've already started picking out various tunes that I can recycle, let's say, into the interactive music concept. One of the original ideas I had was that the so-called musical database evolves, that the record itself sort of evolves. It isn't just one thing. Mm-hmm. And the next phase of that, as soon as I get the time to do it, will be to come up with some new material, but also incorporate some of the older material into that interactive context so that people who are familiar with the tunes but may be interested in hearing them in different ways can do that, not only from a structural standpoint, but also from the standpoint of what does it sound like without the voices, or what does it sound like without the instruments? Various new viewpoints on something that is pre-existing.
Well, Phillips has to be thrilled because, just looking at it from my perspective, you get them more publicity, I think, than anything else they have combined.
Well, they've been very supportive of the things that I've done that don't relate necessarily directly to them. I think they're starting to get a concept of the way the record business works. Most of the titles that they put out, well, not necessarily most of them, but a lot of the titles that were supposed to touch the sort of traditional market that you would think interactivity would go for instance, kids who play video games, or the kinds of games and entertainment that maybe very young kids would be experiencing in school, like little storytelling things, or things that help you learn how to read or spell, things like that. Those kinds of titles don't have a personality aspect to them. In other words, they don't say so-and-so presents, this. There's no real interest on the part of the audience in knowing who put the thing together, as opposed to like the music business, where people often become interested in the personalities of people who put the music together. And in that sense, I think that they're starting to get a sense of the value of that. It's like designer products, Chanel. Any stupid little tasteless thing, as long as it's got those two little interlocking C's on it, suddenly becomes ridiculously expensive. Mm-hmm. and it's just a nature of it's the nature of the marketplace. People are sometimes interested in some kind of brand recognition or some name association.
Well, hopefully, in some cases, it's symbol of quality too. I mean, you're right.
Yeah, that's what I think that's the idea. It's a symbol of not quality in the overarching sense of like good quality versus bad quality, but a certain kind of thing you expect from a certain source, and I think they'll hopefully take greater and greater advantage of that. At the same time, I see this sort of the direct connection that you can have. Let's say by the end of the millennium, when I'm delivering my records from a remote place directly into people's homes, that the market that is not interested in the personality can be equally serviced. In other words, they're interested in something that has a little bit more to do with the objective quality of a thing. As I say, like country music or punk rock or whatever it is, when somebody logs on and they say, well, I want some new music, and these are the things about the music I'm interested in. I want it to be of a sort of jazzy style or funky style or something like that. A whole bunch of descriptors that don't include the name of the artist, you know. And that's a great advantage to me because I've done a lot of eclectic kind of music, all different styles. People start looking for music by style, I could pop up in a whole lot of categories, you know. And then maybe after they listen to it, they become interested in the person who's done it. And then again, it may be a whole other sort of a turnaround to a time when people are more interested in the message, in the experience of what the music does, or the particular entertainment or infotainment or whatever it is. They're much more interested in the nature of the content than they are in the people who made it, or in the personality of the person who made it. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I think it's a real thing, and something that will probably become more and more a legitimate, recognized demographic. A significant segment of the audience who doesn't care exactly who made it, they're only interested in the experience of it.
Well, you seem to have some momentum right now with the Time magazine piece. I thought was great, and people are talking about this project. Do you feel like you have to do something pretty soon to keep it going? I know that you've never been kind of guided by those things, but
when I started this thing, I knew I would have to change my own personal method of operations, and that I would have to spend a lot more time talking about it. And
here we are.
And here we are talking about it again. You know, I've done more publicity this year than I probably have in the past 10 or 20 years, you know, for any of my other records, or for any other projects that I've been involved in. I think that's partly because it's something that, just because of a fortunate synchronicity, people are interested in, and there are a lot of other kind of reasons to be interested in it. And also because this is a union of things that I've always been involved in, but never formally merged into a philosophical and artistic statement before. I used to do a lot of work with computers, but it never had much to do with the music. And now I figured out a way that I can actually change the nature of the music, the way the music is created and experienced, using a lot of the information that I've gained over the years about computers and other kinds of associated technologies. And it's just been sort of fortunate that unlike most of the other things that I kind of get in the leading edge on, and then the timing is not quite right, and I run out of energy, or I run out of interest and go on to something else, or the audience just doesn't catch on to it, or doesn't seem to express any interest in it. It's fortunate for me at this point that I've caught the wave at the right point, and that I've also, before I did that, made a commitment to devote myself to, let's say, the less appealing aspects of it, which are, you know, the PR and, you know, the constantly explaining what's going on over and over and over again and things like that. I've just, you know, committed myself to it, so I'm not so indignant about it. And I see it as no longer see it as a waste of time, but as a way to clarify something for people at a point where they're interested in finding out about it, rather than have to try and convince them that they're interested in the first place. So, so yeah, it's been a busy time, and it probably will be for a while. When I first got into this, into producing No World Order, you know, first started recording the music and mapping out, let's say, a master plan for how it would be delivered to the public. I knew that I was going to probably be working my butt off for about 2 years, and I shouldn't plan on doing anything else seriously for 2 years, and I'm about a year into it now. So I figure another year, and then maybe I can relax for a little while. But yeah, I'll be talking about it still.
But does that mean the next project would come sometime in the next year? I guess the question I was getting at was, already you're hearing, Peter Gabriel and other names kicked around in terms of interactive music, and from my perspective, they're not really interactive music products. They're more interactive computer products that involve music to some degree, but they're not really interactive music products. I guess, do you want to keep the wave going and get something else out there so that it's always fresh in people's minds that you were the first?
I do, but I think that it's also important, it's equally important to have someone else besides myself do something that is recognizably interactive in that way, interactive music or interactive movies or something the public at large can look at and say, oh, now we see that it's a trend and not just a fluke, or it's not just so-and-so's tilting at windmills. And I think that'll happen. The problem again is no longer that this is technically difficult to attain or that the audience is not interested in it. The problem is that artists, have something to lose, I guess, in moving into this area. And that thing is a degree of control over how they are perceived. Giving people different viewpoints on what you do, expanding the range of experience on what you do also means that it's harder and harder to control all aspects of that. And that people will suddenly be looking at your backside, when you're not looking, when you're not aware of it. And a lot of artists don't operate like that. In popular art, I think there are two kinds of artists, and one far outnumbers the other. The one kind is the minority, I guess, is the artist who has something that they want to convey to the audience, and it basically involves revealing something about themselves or something about their attitudes. In other words, they're not afraid to be honest about what they feel and think and let the chips fall where they may. Then again, there are people who use popular art as more as artifice. In other words, it's a way of creating an image of yourself that isn't necessarily accurate, but you think is more palatable to the audience at large. And that's by far the larger group of so-called artists, where they're much more interested in an image and a style and something they can sort of milk for a long time and they can have a great deal of control over. And I don't expect that many of the so-called new interactive artists are going to come out of that field. It's the reason why Billy Idol's failure was so spectacular. Was because his art was artifice, creating this kind of image of himself, the sneering, spiky-haired, fist-thrusting, tough guy, macho, sex, whatever, when in reality, from what people know of his real-life exploits, he's kind of a wimp, and
somebody as a woman.
Yeah, he hits women, blames other people for his failings, and falls down drunk in the street, and other kinds of things that make you think, oh, this guy isn't so macho after all. And one can only expect that if he goes into says now I'm an interactive artist, that he's that he's doing it out of artifice, rather than really exposing some new aspect of himself. I suppose that it can be just as successful for someone who really doesn't have anything honest to say, but can at least come up with a greater range of kind of obfuscatory tricks and things like that. That can at least be entertaining. But I don't think that this art form at this point lends itself easily to that kind of thing. In some ways.
It's kind of like a last-ditch attempt, I'm going to lose my record deal, I'm not selling anymore, what do? I'll be interactive.
Yeah.
It's not that easy.
Well, I think that, the people who were most outraged, was the fact that he chose the term cyberpunk. Because first of all, the term cyberpunk has already been and gone. William Gibson and the people who originated the form, which was a literary form to start
which
with.
is kind of outmoded now.
It's outmoded. It's gone. It's kind of history. They milked that cow and moved on, and second of all, I think it was his tendency to refer to himself as a hacker, and both of those things, cyberpunk and hacker, cyberpunk implies a hacker mentality, require a pretty sophisticated knowledge of computing machinery and computer concepts and things like that. Original hackers were people who broke into telephone systems and using the little things they call blue boxes were able to make like long distance telephone calls by connecting by doing these really elaborate kind of workarounds of what they call hacks to the telephone system. And eventually hackers, I've been to many of the hackers conferences, these are the really hardcore computer guys, who I imagine took a great deal of umbrage at being lumped together with Billy Idol, who they associate mostly with hair gel. So in that sense, he really took a big chance, and I think he dug himself a big hole that he just fell in.
Well, he's always been kind of a caricature. He always reminded me of a guy trying to sing like Jim Morrison and look like David Bowie.
Well, it was
this big mess.
I don't think it's ever been, the kind of thing where it's one of these natural talents. The guy is a natural talent. He's just looking for the right setting, to just do what he does and just let him do his thing, and he'll just, he'll entertain you. It's always been one of these more traditional kind of showbiz things where, the producer has a great deal to say about what goes on, and the management has a great deal to say about what goes on, and essentially it's something that's micro-engineered into a contemporary product. It's like automobile business, where you have certain things you have to do, and then there are certain things that you're trying to guess about the way that the audience thinks, what their buying habits are, and things like that. And then you try and get all these specialists involved, try and time everything right, and if you're lucky, it works. And I suppose they thought they could do that again this time, and it just, whoops, didn't quite work. It looked like all the ducks were in a row, but unfortunately there was a terrific backlash, and didn't work. Well, not unfortunately, because if it had succeeded, it would have defined in a lot of people's minds what this new art form is about, and that would have been real unfortunate, because I don't think it really reflected any of that.
Finally, I want to ask you, and this may be a really stupid question, but when you sing International Feel, and you get to the line, wait another year, Utopia is here, and you really seem to sing it with some force, and the first couple times I heard the song, I thought, people had mentioned it to me, Todd's trying to tell us something.
No, I'm just pandering.
You're just pandering.
Yeah.
You're doing the Billy Idol thing.
I'm just pandering to the audience. There's no guarantee of that. It's Utopia got together a year and a half ago or something, did a little tour of, well, it's almost 2 years now. It was in May of '92. Did a tour of Japan just to see what it'd be like, and it was fun to play, and it also brought out a lot of the old sort of tensions, like there were unresolved issues that remained unresolved even to that point, and we discovered what they are, and decided at the time that it wouldn't be a good idea to just dive headfirst in, and try and revive the thing, but we better ruminate on our experience, think about it a little more, and take it from there. A lot has changed. It's not that we don't, that we have no desire to work as a band together, but it's hard to find a circumstance nowadays. I've committed myself to something that involves a lot of my time at this point. Roger has a regular job that he's happy with, and for him to get off for a large period of time, he has to work for a long time, he's got to work for a year and a half before he can get 3 months off to make an album and go out on the road or something like that. Willie has been trying to cultivate a career as a record producer, and wants to continue with that, and so everyone has other kind of projects of their own and economic situations of their own that they have to worry about. And if we could find a situation, a time, a place, and a reason that would allow everyone to get together without abandoning, what they've been working for individually all this time, then we certainly would probably get together, make a record, take it out on the road, and it may involve a lot of these new things that I've been working on. It could be conceivably an interactive record. But as I say, it's not something that we can just say, hey, let's just, it sounds like a good idea, let's just go do it. It requires a lot of synchronous events to happen. So when I say that, it's in some sense a tease. It's not a guarantee that anything will happen, but it's sort of like a little recognition, a little homage to the band, because everyone has such fond memories of the good old days.
It's a question that begs to be asked, so I had to do it.
No
Let's
problem.
get a couple of shots, Todd, and we'll be off. Buttons. And, I got to ask you this because I've never figured it out. I know how to do everything else in the damn machine, but the direction buttons, the little arrows.
The little arrows.
In between the two arrows. And I don't have it.
Those things that go left,
Yeah,
right,
they go
so
left and right, up and down.
Yeah. What those do is, if you, let's say, go to one of the flavors, let's say tempo or something like that, and you when you go into that so-called real time, which is hit the button number 2.
Right.
And so just to experiment, like start everything up sort of in its default. Like if you go to the very top button on the top left things and push the buttons, you can connect something directly to the buttons, and that'll allow you to, only when you're in that so-called real-time mode, when you hit button number 2. And you can go to every single flavor in there and connect them all up to the joystick. So it's changing. They're used in Nintendo machines, and I always like to have things moving all the time. I expect most people will use it by setting up some combination of things and letting it figure out an album, a musical performance for them while they go do the things they normally do when they listen to music, which is either, shut their eyes and listen to it, or wash the dishes, or...
It's great housework music.